So joining us today to talk about engaging with a local audience is the founding editor of award-winning online magazine, the MagPie, and managing editor of America's oldest literary magazine, North American Review, Emily Stowe.
Thank you, Seth. The reason why I'm here today is a result of the point of this presentation. It's all about community building. And I was invited here to speak today because I know Felicia through the MagPie community that I started, and I know Seth from our work together at the North American Review. So thanks so much for having me. This is wonderful, thanks. So what I'm going to talk about today, well, first of all, here's me. There's my titles. I'm the founding editor of MagPie magazine, and I'm not only the managing editor, but I'm also the visual art editor for the North American Review. And I was telling my husband, he's in the back filming right now, that it's hard to be nervous about public speaking when you know what you're talking about. And this is more than just my job. This is my life. I'm kind of obsessed. So I think about these things all the time. So I think I know what I'm talking about. So what I'm going to cover today is my art background and my creative work background. These are all the things that led to the idea of starting MagPie. So how that started, and then my day job, my two roles at the North American Review as managing editor and the visual art editor. And then I'm going to compare the two publications. They're very different. And then I have a bunch of examples of full circle moments of my life that really prove that this is my destiny to be doing this. And then I do have a handout for everyone to take at the end that just has some resources, websites of things that I'll be talking about in the presentation in case you care to look those up and learn more. So my art background and inspiration, here is all the creative things that I'm into that eventually led to the idea of MagPie. So we're going way back to the 90s. When I was a kid, I was totally obsessed with magazines. I've loved magazines my whole life. And my dream when I was in middle school was I really wanted to work as an intern for Sassy magazine, which was a very 90s teen magazine. I dreamt of, being a cool 90s girl in my Doc Marten boots interviewing alternative rocker guys and that kind of thing. And I also dreamed of being published in Sassy magazine. They had this special column that they published essays by readers that was called It Happened to Me. But when I was in middle school, nothing interesting had ever happened to me yet, so I didn't really have any material to submit a good story. I have a bunch of artistic inspiration. I'm an artist myself, and I love following other artists. I have a tendency to love bright colors. I love sparkly things. But my all-time favorite artist, ironically, is neither bright colors nor sparkly. It's this black and white artwork with the bold text on top. That artist's name is Barbara Kruger, and she does lots of collage work and a lot of text-heavy political statement type of things. So she's my all-time fave. So when I get to high school, I'm a graduate of East Waterloo High School. My older brother, Andy, had a friend named Jeff Rindles, who was I think 1 year older than him. And Jeff Rindles started his own underground zine. And this is also a very 90s thing to do, where you're literally cutting things out and pasting them down and making black and white photocopies and then leaving stacks of them in the hallways of your high school and hoping that people take them. And I was so impressed and inspired by his underground zine that was called Sigh that I decided that I wanted to start my own zine that was more of a feminist response to his. And so my zine, which I started with my best friend Shannon, is called Candy Girl. And so we had several issues of Candy Girl. It was a big success. She's 1 year older than me, so that ended when she left for college. I was also a member of mainstream media because I was on the high school newspaper staff of the Orange and Black as a columnist. So when I got to college, I decided to major in visual art. These are some examples of some of my drawings and some of my prints. I started out thinking that I was going to be a jewelry metals emphasis area because I was really into that when I was in high school. But once I got to college, I took a printmaking class, and then it was all over for me. I had no choice to change to printmaking because I loved it. It was so amazing because when you're in a print class, your final project, because of the nature of printmaking, is to make repeat copies of something. Everyone does an edition of their print, and then you trade, and you get one of everybody's in your class. So those are treasured possessions of mine. I have held on to them. I'm waiting for all of my cohort to become famous. They're going to be worth a lot of money someday. I also love doing mixed media pieces. Some of the Spaceman is actually a collage, a mixed media piece that I did for an illustration class. The one with the pink and the blue, that's actually a picture of me from when I was little, and that's a screen print. I do love to use text and humor in my art. The green one, if you can't read it, it says, "Hey Mom, what's for lunch?" Ah, not again. It's peanut butter and jellyfish. So after I graduated from college with my bachelor in art, I ended up getting my very first digital camera, and that is what opened up the world of blogs to me. So I started a blog. It's gone through lots of different names over the years. I don't even know what it is anymore. It still exists, but I haven't updated it forever. But the purpose of the blog was not really personal stories, but more things like, here's the great deal I got at the thrift store, or here's my outfit that I like, or here's a recipe that I came up with. But it was all kinds of different things that I was interested in. But then after I did the blog for a while, I also wrote some various essays that were published in other online magazines. There was one called Diggs Magazine. I did things about party planning. As you can see, I am into that kind of stuff. And then eventually, Sassy Magazine, that I love so much, as is the nature of most print magazines, it folded. And the editor of Sassy Magazine, her name is Jane Pratt. She went on to start a website called xojane.com, which unfortunately is also folded by now. But I'm so happy to say that 15 years after I originally had the idea in high school or in junior high of getting my essay published in the It Happened to Me column, I got it accepted. So my work was published on the XOJane website, and they paid me $50, so that means I'm a professional writer, right? If it got me some money eventually. Okay, and so then after I graduated from college, I also participated in some art festivals. I did Artapalooza downtown Cedar Falls, I think 3 different times. I did the Pear Fair in Cedar Falls once and the Charles City Artifest. I sold my paintings, my mixed media pieces, jewelry, and greeting cards. My career goal when I was still in college was I really wanted to work for Hallmark or American Greetings, one of the big greeting card companies. And of course, I sent off my portfolio and got rejected because the competition is very tough for those things. So this was my way to just get my work straight into the hands of my audience by selling directly at festivals. And it was really amazing to be able to talk face-to-face to people and get feedback about my art. Because my stuff is so sparkly and bright, it's very popular with little girls. So that was always exciting to see some little kid dragging their parent over to my booth. But the thing that I learned about doing that is that as great as it is to have that face-to-face interaction with your customers, it's not worth the time and effort that it took me, because even if I did, a banner day and sold $500 worth of stuff, it still was probably not much of a profit considering how much time and money I had to invest in all of my supplies. So that taught me that even though I love and I need to have an outlet for my creativity, I don't really want to rely on that for what I do to pay the bills. So here's some more examples of my art. These are things that I have made in my adult years, post-college. When you don't have access to printing presses, it's kind of hard to be a printmaker. So I moved into just focusing on the mixed media paintings. I do a lot of shiny things. I love this silver foil tape that appears in most of my paintings. I do a lot of collage and different materials, so there's a lot of texture. There's a few more examples. The spaceman painting on the right, that one actually became a cover art for MagPie magazine, so it's really useful for me to be an artist myself, just in case I can't find someone else to do the cover. I can always use one of my old pieces or create something new just for the themed issue. I'm also really into photography. With every cell phone I get, my camera improves. I have a fancy DSLR camera that I hardly ever use. You know, people say that the best camera is the one that you happen to have with you in the moment. And so that is what I have found to be true. These things are, I think the black and white one is the DSLR, but everything else is cell phone camera pictures. So going into my work history. So I've had a lot of creativity in my various jobs, in jobs where you wouldn't necessarily think they're creative. I worked as a secretary at UNI for 10 years. I started out in the School of Music for 3 years, and then I moved over to the TRIO Student Support Services program, and I loved that job. It was working with students. I was answering the phone and doing all the normal types of office stuff, but I found lots of opportunities to infuse the office and the environment and the vibes with all of the creative things that I was interested in. I figured out just on my own how to make all these flyers and programs and brochures, printed materials that we needed for various events. But also I think I did things like decorate the bulletin boards for homecoming and decorate our office. That picture on the upper right is the lounge area that was in our office, and I took it upon myself to decorate it all in purple and gold colors. It was really important to me to make it a very welcoming space because we wanted to encourage students to spend time in our office and use it. Then I also have done a lot of volunteering, organizing things for community events. I was a member of a group called the U.S. Department of Arts and Culture Hub that was at UNI. That's not actually an official government agency, but it's the name of this organization that believes in bringing culture to the community. And we had an event it was in this very room actually, that was called Common Threads, A Community Imagines Together. And that was in 2016, right after the election. And it was just a time for the community to come together. We had listening circles and lots of different arts and crafts activities. And it was really popular. This place was full with families. There was lots of kids here. So that was great. It was just a good celebration of diversity in our community. And that's one of the things that I love so much about living in Waterloo. Then more recently, I also got involved with a series that's called Creative Cedar Valley. Gary Goody is a professor at UNI, and he won a grant from Veridian to create this new class that debuted last year. And when I heard about this thing happening, I thought, this guy needs help, because it was a huge project that I correctly understood that he was kind of in over his head because it involved organizing all of these events in the community. And I know from my own experience how complex it can be to organize one event, and he had 5 of them on the docket for a single semester. So I volunteered to help him. I did a bunch of graphic design. designed all of this information. It did all the social media, all the event photography, and was a resource to all of the students in the class to help them figure out how to proceed with their projects. The picture at the top right, Lichtenbergianism, that's the name of the textbook that he chose for the class. And because I wanted to be ahead of the students before the class started at the end of August, I read the whole book cover to cover so I would know what we were talking about. And I love the book so much that I decided that I wanted to send an email to the author. I found him, Dale Lyles, and I basically sent him a fan letter and told him how much I love this book. And I was so happy that I reached out to him because we had a great back and forth communication, and it ended up that he ended up being in a Zoom call with our whole class. So that's what the picture is the students lining up to ask him questions, and he's on the screen behind them. So that was really great. I was so glad that I reached out to him because it really helped all of them. So the biggest thing that I've done as far as volunteer work goes is I got involved with the AFSCME union. That is the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees. And AFSCME is the union that represents all of the merit employees at UNI. So merit employees are everybody who's not faculty and is not administration, and it's not professional and scientific staff. So that means secretaries, the people who are mowing the lawn, the people who are cooking in the kitchen, it's just all of the other types of jobs that it requires to run a university. And how I got started with them was that I saw they sent out an email that were just asking for people to join the executive board members to come to the meetings. And I thought that sounds kind of interesting, and it seems like a good resume builder. So I'm just gonna go to one and see what happens. And when I got there, they were like, ooh, a young person, welcome. They were super excited, but they were super nice. And so I decided to take one of the positions on the executive board. And then eventually that led to me becoming the recording secretary. I was one of the few people who worked in an office as a secretary, so that was the task that I was willing to do. But after I did that for a little while, they encouraged me to apply for this program. AFSCME International had a program called the Women's Leadership Academy. And every year they take applications from women from all over the country and the world, every place that AFSCME represents people. And I was chosen. So I wrote an essay about why I wanted to do it, and I had my letters of recommendation from my local president and the president of AFSCME Iowa. And so I was one of 30 women that year that got to go to this. And it was basically like, I would describe it as a leadership boot camp. So we were in Indianapolis for a week, and we learned all these different leadership skills. And we had to come up with some sort of a service project that we were going to do in service to our local union. And considering my background with blogs and my zine in high school, what I really wanted to do, because they didn't have, was create a newsletter for UNI merit employees. And the thing is that was so great about it was after I did the AFSCME Women's Leadership Academy, they asked me to come back the following year to be a mentor to the next class. I ended up going to conventions and conferences all over the country. I ended up going to Chicago, Las Vegas, Boston, Indianapolis, Miami, all kinds of things. And so these are things that if I never would have just said, that sounds interesting, I'm just gonna check that out. It totally changed the trajectory of my entire life because I've met all these people, I've got friends from all over the country, and I got to travel and do all this really cool stuff. So it culminated in the biggest, scariest thing I've ever done in my life, was speaking on stage in front of 6,000 people in Las Vegas to introduce Hillary Clinton. So that's what the picture is. There's me on stage and she's the little dot in the background. So this next slide is just some pictures. There's the one on the bottom is me. That's my face looking dorky. on the Jumbotron when I'm on stage speaking. And then the top picture is the Worker's Voice is the name of the newsletter that I created. And I actually did 2 different versions of it because there was the one that was printed that went to people's mailboxes, but there was also an email version. But it's important when you're sending things to merit employees, depending on what type of job you have, you may not have a desk and a computer. And so we want to make sure that everybody also gets it in their mailbox. And that was supposed to be a 1-year long service project, and I ended up doing it for 5 years. So I think I paid my dues, and eventually I did need to stop doing it because I just got too busy with other things. So what I was thinking as I was making this union newsletter and writing stories about insurance benefits, I thought, what if I could use all of these skills that I learned but apply them to the stuff that I really care about, like music and fashion and art and cooking, all of the subjects that I am more interested in than insurance benefits. And so that is what led to the idea of creating MagPie magazine. So MagPie, it's a free quarterly online magazine that features arts and culture of the Cedar Valley is how it started, but now the reach is getting a little bit bigger. It's open for submissions to all ages and all levels of experience. My goal is to give a platform to other creative people, and by having deadlines and other people involved for me to be accountable to, this ensures that I actually follow through with it because it's really easy when you're just working on a painting to say, oh, I'm too tired, I'll finish that later. So I need the deadlines to keep myself on track. This is an interactive PDF format, so that means that when you are reading it online, you can click on links. There are some things in it. I link to books that I recommend to their Amazon page, or my brother Andy actually is I call him the MagPie resident DJ, because every issue he always makes a playlist on Spotify that's based on the theme of the issue. So you can click on that and go listen to the music that goes with it. So this next picture is, I have a smart car. It was a dream of mine. I am the kind of person who totally believes in making vision boards and manifesting the things that you want to happen. And one of my dreams was to have a tiny car that was sparkly fuchsia. And eventually I did get it. So I've got the MagPie decal on the back. And so that's fun to drive around town. It catches people's attention for sure. And then I also have buttons. I like to create swag. That's one thing that I've learned is that if you make business cards and make a website and make buttons and stickers and things, people think that you know what you're doing. You can appear to be legit if you have the swag to back it up. So I love that. So the other part of MagPie, because it is an online magazine, I wanted to have some in-person events so that this community of people can get together in person and meet. So I referred to those as MagPie meetups. The magazine started in 2018, and so we had quite a few of these events for the first several issues, and then of course 2020 pandemic. That kind of put a halt to all of that. I've had one or two things post-pandemic, and I would like to do more in the future. It's just a matter of having the time to do it. But those were really great. There was pictures. I didn't warn you, but some people in the audience may see themselves on screen. That's my mother-in-law, by the way, Mary Gale, one of my biggest fans of MagPie. Thank you. Oops. Okay, so then MagPie community outreach. I've done lots of events just like this where I go places and talk about MagPie. I'm always interested in spreading the word and recruiting new people that want to be published. I participated there's an event at UNI that's called the Community Engagement Celebration Day that is sponsored by Veridian. And that's an event where students and staff who do community engagement projects throughout the year set up a table, display, and and talk about what they're doing. And so the judges come around and talk to you, and then there's also all the people there get to vote. And so it was in 2019, I won the People's Choice Award for MagPie magazine. So that was very exciting. I got $200, yay. There were some other events. I went to Culture Fest at the Waterloo Center for the Arts. I also speak in classes. I've gone to do a guest lecture at Hawkeye. I've done several classes at UNI. That picture with the screen in the top middle, that was in the art department at UNI to talk about finding your creative fulfillment was my topic there. And then I also speak to the practicum class of students every semester that helps at the North American Review. And then the other thing that I did as MagPie was I have established 2 little free libraries, one at UNI and one at Hawkeye. So that was very exciting. That was honestly just because I read a lot and I have a ton of books to get rid of, and I was looking for a good way to do that. But they've been very popular, and I'm so happy when I see other people contributing and taking things, so they're pretty good. So this picture is from issue number 24. It was celebrating 6 years of MagPie, and at that point there were 280 contributors. But as an update, now that I am done with issue number 26, we hit 300 people. So all of those names on that list are people that have been involved with the magazine, and I could tell you anybody how I either know them from my life outside of MagPie or how it is that they approached me or what the connection is. The thing about building this community, which I'm super proud of, by the way, is the fact that it grows. I initially reached out to a small group of family and friends because I know that Iowa has all kinds of interesting things happening. And I think that we have a reputation for just being flyover country and there's nothing good here. You only have culture on the coasts, and that is not at all true. And so that was what I wanted to prove by putting a spotlight on all of these interesting people that I know and the different types of creative work that they do. But since I started with a group of people that I knew personally, eventually it has grown out from there. And like everybody on here is either somebody I know or I can tell you the connection between me and that person. So I'm very happy about all of that. Many of these people have returned for multiple issues. I've had amazing contributors like Felicia and Seth who have written multiple times for the magazine, so I love that. I could never do this without having everybody willing to share it on social media and spread the word, and it has grown over time. So this all led to how I ended up working at the North American Review. In 2020, my job with the TRIO Student Support Services Office ended, and it's because that was a federal grant-funded program and we had to reapply for a grant every 5 years. This program existed at UNI for 36 years, and it was this amazing program because we served students who had disabilities, were low income or first generation college students. And I was definitely a low income first generation college student myself, and so I really loved working with this student population. But unfortunately, it's just super tough competition, and you keep your fingers crossed every 5 years when you reapply. And eventually our luck ran out and we did not get it renewed. So I never would have left that job otherwise because I loved my boss, I loved the department. But the timing for me personally was so lucky because right when I needed to find a new job, I saw a job posted at the North American Review for their managing editor. And I thought, that sounds fancy. And I had total imposter syndrome. I did not think I had a shot, but the only thing was I thought, well, maybe I'll have a leg up on the competition because I made a whole magazine from scratch and I have deadlines for fun. Maybe that will appeal to them. So this job was my destiny, and I do have some full circle moments to prove it. So today at the North American Review, I did obviously get hired. And I am the managing editor, and I'm also the visual art editor. I'm super honored to be part of this long history of the magazine. It was created in 1815 in Boston, so it's the oldest literary magazine in the nation. The picture on the right is a very special issue to me. This was the fall 2021 issue, and it was the first time in the history of the magazine that an issue had been created by a team of all women editors. As you can imagine, when something was started in 1815, it was definitely an old white guys club for a long time. And so it was very important and special to me that I got to be part of that history-making issue. So what exactly is a managing editor? I saw this meme from Barbie and I thought, oh, this is perfect. It's just a million different things. I have a very busy job that I can never be bored with because every day I have new problems to solve and things to figure out, but I love it. It's probably the most stressed out I've ever been, and yet it's my dream job, so I'll take it. That's why I said in the beginning that it's not just a job, this is my life. I'm thinking constantly outside of business hours about things to do with my job. I have to juggle all of the details of the business of running a magazine. All of the other editors are faculty at UNI, but I am the one and only full-time employee of the North American Review. So I'm the person that's holding down the fort in the middle of the storm. Everybody else is doing a million things, but I'm keeping everybody on track. So I have a lot to think about constantly. So what exactly do I do for the North American Review? I do tons of organization. I run our weekly staff meeting. I keep everybody on track. I give them updates on different projects where we stand, income that we're making, emails that we're getting with questions that we need to discuss as a team. I'm the office presence, so I'm answering the phone and answering emails, or if somebody comes in, I can talk to them. We have a class of students every semester that is the practicum class that helps us as editorial assistants. And so they are responsible for, outside of their 3 hours of class a week, to come in and work in the office for 2 hours a week. So I've got students coming and going, and I'm the omnipresent person who's always there to help them with what they're doing. Which I'm so glad that I still get to work with students. I was kind of worried about that. I didn't want to lose that from my last job. I'm also constantly looking for ways to improve our processes, streamlining things, documenting how to do things. I'm also the contact person, like the liaison between our vendors, the printing companies, our subscription host companies, things like that. And I say so much, etc. I came here to the library to use the makerspace to make tote bags with the Cricut vinyl heat press with our NAR logo before we went to an event. And I was even interviewed for a documentary film about Gary Kelly, because he always does our cover art for us. So I was part of a movie about him. The worst parts, I would say, of my job are probably working on our mailing list. And it's not that it's hard, it's just that it's tedious. So I always kind of dread when I have to do that 3 times a year. But the best parts are definitely all of the things that have to do with art. So I'm going to get to that, but first I just want to talk about one last thing, and that is travel. We have gone, because we have students in our class every semester, we try to provide them with good experiences for professional types of things and networking opportunities. But I wanted to point out a couple of things that we've done that I thought you guys might be interested in. We went to the Printers Row Lit Fest in Chicago a few years ago, and that was really cool because it's just blocks and blocks of tents full of books. And so if you're looking for networking opportunities, there's tons of readings, tons of authors, tons of presses. So that was really cool. But the thing about that, I was so vindicated that I worried about it constantly leading up to it, was that I try to never forget anything and have, I'm checking my packing list a million times. And on Saturday of that weekend, it was a beautiful day. And on Sunday, it was raining sideways. And so I felt so happy that I packed plastic sheeting and table weights, and I managed to protect all of our paper goods that would have gotten totally ruined. So I was glad about that. And then the next thing is we also went to AWP in Kansas City. If you've never heard of AWP, it's the Association of Writers and Writing Programs, and it is a huge organization. They have an annual conference that I believe this one had over 12,000 people there. So it's a big deal. And they have a gigantic book fair and then just tons and tons of panels and readings and workshops. There's just tons of stuff that they cover, just about any subject matter that you could possibly be interested in listening to something about. The thing about that was when I went to a panel that was about artists who are also writers. So there was, I personally knew one of the visual poets, Naoko Fujimoto, so I went to support her because I met her when we hosted her at UNI for a reading. And it was really cool, but I thought, why is there nothing here that's specifically for managing editors? Because I have only been in the job for a few years. I would love to have the opportunity to talk to other people with the same job title as me, because I have a feeling that it's a totally different job depending on where you work. And so I've got all these questions, and I noticed there wasn't anything like that. And so Jeremy Schraffenberger, who's one of the other editors of the North American Review, he said, well, why don't you submit a proposal for a panel? If you do that, then you could be the moderator and ask everybody your questions just with a large audience. And so I did submit a proposal. And I don't know yet if it will be accepted, but I'm hoping to find out by the end of this week because they promised to tell people in August. But the title of my panel would be Somehow I Managing Editors Who Manage Editors. So we'll see. If it gets accepted, then I will be going to Los Angeles to do that in March. The thing about AWP, because it is such a large organization, they change what region in the country they have their conference every year. And so we went to Kansas City because it was drivable and we could take students that way. Next year it's in Los Angeles. I don't know where it'll be after that, but I think it'll probably come back to the Midwest every third year. So as the visual art editor for the magazine, I've been doing this work since I first started, but I didn't officially get listed in the masthead as the visual art editor until last summer. So now it's official. But what I do is I select art that we publish on the inside of the magazine. I also work with Gary Kelly, who is our cover art editor. And then I'm also going to talk about collecting some art for my personal collection that I keep in my office. So my art selection process in the magazine, we publish a piece of art is assigned to each piece of prose. We have way too many poems per issue to have art for each one, but every story and essay has a piece of art that's typically facing the title page. And so what my process is I back to back, I create this spreadsheet. We have something called the flat plan, where we can see at a glance, page by page, what the layout of the whole magazine is. And I put the stories on my spreadsheet in order by how they're going to appear in the magazine. And then I have to just sit down and read them all back to back. And I make a bunch of notes just of basic plot points and things that jump out to me as being visually something interesting that could inspire the art that I would want to choose to publish next to it. And normally, my process involves finding multiple pieces of art per artist, because that's for two reasons. One is that I like to have the visual continuity through the issue. As you're flipping through, you can see, oh yeah, there's that person's style that comes up throughout. But also, normally we can only afford to pay artists $100 per piece. And so it's just easier for them to say yes when I reach out to them. If I can say, can I publish these 3 pieces and pay you $300 rather than just $100, because there's a little bit of paperwork involved that UNI requires for them to get paid. So I try to make it worth their while. And then, of course, I reach out to the artists. I contact them and ask them if they are willing to let us license their work, and then follow up with all of the paperwork involved with that. So that's the typical process. So we have a very special issue that we are working on right now. Our fall 2024 is the 60-year anniversary of the North American Review moving to Iowa. So it started out in Boston for several years, and then it was in New York, and then there was a long period of time when there wasn't a North American Review at all, and then eventually it got revived, and it came to Iowa and was at Mount Vernon Cornell College in Mount Vernon, Iowa. So that happened in 1964, and then I believe it was 1969 when the magazine moved to being housed at UNI. So because it's the 60-year anniversary of the NAR coming to Iowa, we decided to apply for a grant from the Iowa Arts Council. And what our proposed project is we want to not only have all of the visual art in this anniversary issue be by artists who are in Iowa, but we also want to partner with the Hearst Center for the Arts to have a show of all of the originals of these artists' work. And so we did get the grant. It's been kind of hectic summer because the timeline was very tight of waiting to find out if we got it or not, and then we did, and then I had to hit the ground running and contact all these people. So normally I do try to have multiple pieces per artist, but for this issue, it was important to have as many people, different people as possible. And so we have 18 different Iowa artists in this issue. The cover art there by Gary Kelly is called Homegrown in Iowa. And then this piece on the right is artwork by Felicia. So I'm so happy because I've had this crossover in both of my worlds. I've had people that have been published in the North American Review who have reached out to me about putting something in MagPie magazine. And now Felicia is the first person who was in MagPie and has now come to the North American Review. So I'm so happy to have that crossover exchange there. So about Gary Kelly, I assume that this audience is familiar with who he is. Normally, I'm speaking to a room full of college students who have no idea. And so I'd like to explain to them that he's probably most famous for the fact that he has these big murals in every Barnes & Noble store of all of the famous artists. And so I was assuring the college students, I'm sure you've seen his work before. But he's also locally so famous, and the reason why I have been a lifelong fan, being from Waterloo, is because he always does the poster every year for the College Hill Arts Festival. And so I grew up with my parents taking me to that, and we always had to look at the poster, and they never bought it for me, but I was a fan of his work. And that picture of Joni Mitchell in the top, that was from Rolling Stone magazine in 1999, and I had that page torn out and hung on the wall in my dorm room. So I've been a fan for a while. He's done over 70 of our North American Review covers since 1986, so he's a huge part of the visual identity of our magazine. So I actually have a connection to Gary. When I was a senior in high school in 1999, I applied for an art scholarship through the Waterloo Center for the Arts, and they asked him to be the judge. And he chose me to win the scholarship. And so that meant so much to me because I was such a fan of his work. I really respected him. And it really made me feel good to know that he thought I was worthy of getting this scholarship. And so, because my parents, they were a little like, you're gonna be an art major? Can you get a job with that? But they didn't have any money, so it was all on me. student loans. And so I was like, well, if I'm paying for it, I'm going to do what I want to do. And so having that as, that just gave me some, I don't know, it just made me feel like, okay, yes, I am going in the right direction with this. This person believes in me. So it really means a lot to me now to be a professional colleague to him. I used to work at Montage downtown Cedar Falls, and his studio is right next door upstairs. And I remember every day thinking, God, I wonder what it looks like up there. I knew it was up there, but I never knew what it was like. And now I get to visit him several times a year to go talk about art. So that picture on the bottom is him holding the original piece and me holding the magazine of that special issue that was produced by all women. The name of that piece of art is called Women of Words. And normally when I ask him, I give him ideas for the cover, I try my best to never tell him what to do. I try to just give him a list of ideas to inspire him. But with that one, I said, this is this special issue, and so I would really like it if it was colorful and a celebration of women. And that's what he came up with, and it happens to be 4 women, and it was 4 of us women who created that issue. And since that was so special to me for lots of different reasons, that was the first issue after as I started in my job part-time, and then I became full-time. And so they mentioned that fact and were talking about me in the letter from the editors. And I also have multiple people that I know personally who I published their art in that issue. So lots of reasons why that was super special to me. And so my husband purchased the original of that art, and so that now lives in our living room. So I love that. So the cover art process, like I was saying, when it comes to choosing the art for the individual stories and essays, I'm reading them and making my plot points one by one. But it's interesting that although the North American Review does not do themed issues, when I'm the first person to read things back to back like that, and when the other editors are choosing their pieces, there's one person that's reading the nonfiction, there's a different person who's reading the fiction, and they are not aware of what the other person is choosing and what the stories are about. But when I read them back to back, no matter what, it never fails. I always find that there are things that are in common throughout the issue. I find multiple examples of different themes. And so that's what I create, a list that I give to Gary and say, I read this essay that was about this topic, but then there was a short story that mentioned it again. That was weird. So then I put those together and give him the examples. And then when I go to his office, I meet with him and explain all of this stuff. So he loves that because prior to me starting this job, nobody ever gave him direction. And I know personally from being an artist myself, and especially taking an illustration class, that when the world is your oyster, it's impossible to come up with a good idea. You have to have some kind of parameters or something to be your jumping off point for inspiration. And so when I started the job and I realized that nobody had ever done that, it's like, of course I'm gonna give him a list of ideas. And so that is a big part of the process, is that I go and visit him at his studio, I present him with this list, and we go through it and talk about ideas. We have several different templates for our cover art, and we try to rotate through them just so we kind of mix it up. So those are some examples of them. And I tell him to do whichever one he wants, as long as it's not like one of the previous 2, just to keep it different. So the cover art process, I go to his studio, we talk about it, and then when he's ready with the art, he calls me, I come back, I pick it up, and then I bring it back to the North American Review office where I have this camera stand that's shown there on the right, and I set up, honestly, I use my phone because my camera is so good now, and that's how I photograph his art so that we have the super high-res image for the cover art when we go to press. And then a lot of times he lets me keep the sketch, and I love that because since we are this historic magazine, I'm always very aware that even though it's present day, we're constantly making history. There's a huge archive of old ephemera, paperwork, all kinds of things to do with the history of the North American Review at the UNI library. And so as things are happening in the present day, I try to keep things and save them and set them aside. I've got a box of stuff that is going to end up in the archive eventually. So I love having cool stuff like that because it's much more interesting to me personally to see sketches than it is to see a letter or something. So another community that I'm a part of is online because I am an artist myself and I am a huge art appreciator. I follow tons of artists on social media. And so it has been one of my greatest joys to find a place for an artist that I already am a huge fan of, and I see something in the magazine that their art would work perfectly with. And so I've been able to send emails to people that I don't know and just say, I'm a huge fan, I would love to do this. And then I tell them what the story is about, and when they agree, I'm so happy. So here's a couple of examples of that. That dog vase is by Katie Kimmel. That lives in my office. It makes me laugh every time I look at it. It's just so silly. And the story that we paired that with was the winning story of our Kurt Vonnegut Speculative Fiction Prize, and it was a story called My Dog, Lenny Bruce, and it was kind of a post-apocalyptic, pretty depressing story, but about a dog that was like a stand-up comedian and would tell jokes to all the neighborhood stray dogs. So I wanted to use that with it. And then the other piece on the right, that artist is named Nasheed Chroma, and he does these digital pieces that very frequently have some sort of floral element over the face of a famous person. So the person who's depicted in that one that I bought is Harry Styles. And that was different than the one that we chose for the magazine. And then I have this shelf in my office that has all of these examples of things that I have bought for my personal collection, but I keep them at work. One of the things that I do, because I am the main person who's holding down the fort in our office, is our department head brings tour groups through all the time of prospective students and parents. And so I always tell them a little bit about art and what I do and show them that. And this is very popular with parents. They love that. I think it's just exciting. I have the most colorful office on campus, and I think that when they just see white wall, boring room after boring room, and then all of a sudden it's this explosion of color when they walk in my door. So comparing MagPie to the North American Review, these two publications couldn't be more different. This slide is not very interesting. And this is something that I made for a different presentation I was giving to one of the senior seminar classes at UNI, where they were talking specifically about the topic of literary magazines and collections. And they were judging magazines based on audience, purpose, principle of inclusion, and organization. And so I made this chart for them, but it was just comparing the audience size for the North American Review. First of all, we started in 1815, so it's been around for a long time. MagPie magazine started in 2018, so it's a baby. But the thing about the North American Review is one of our greatest sources of income every year. There is a website called JSTOR. If you're not familiar with it, it is a place where all kinds of publications are in the archive forever. So magazines get scanned and people use these for research purposes. And because our magazine has existed since 1815, we probably have more issues than anybody else on there that are potential sources for people doing research. And so when somebody clicks on one of those articles, that generates a little tiny dollar amount that comes to us. And in last year, I think it was earlier in 2024, we got a check for, how much was it? $22,000. And that was the result of over 695,000 clicks. that somebody clicked on something by the NAR in JSTOR. So we get income from places like JSTOR. We have 3 contests every year that cost $23 for somebody to submit to. But the reason why that costs so much is because we pay the winner $1,000, we pay the judge $500, and then just to kind of offset the cost of printing. It is extremely expensive to print this magazine, and it's very nice. Like, I'm very happy that we have full color interior art. It looks so much better than it used to. The entire magazine had a rebrand in 2019 in which it became bigger, perfect bound. It's really more like a paperback book that's magazine sized with full color interior. Now, in contrast to that, MagPie magazine, it's very important to me that it's free for readers. I don't want there to be any hindrance to anybody to access it. I have a pretty small social media reach. I have 723 people on Facebook and 554 on Instagram. Facebook for the North American Review, 6,500 on Facebook, 4,600 on Instagram, almost 10,000 on Twitter. So the reach is different. Obviously, mine is more of a local focus. North American Review is mostly North America, but there are, worldwide, we have subscribers all over the world. But yeah, so there's a lot of money coming in and a lot of money going out with the North American Review. We are a nonprofit organization. We really don't make much of a profit. But with MagPie, it's super important to me to keep it free for everybody. I also don't want to have any ads. I don't want to be beholden to any sort of advertisers or so I just try to keep all money not involved with that. So the principle of inclusion, the North American Review is pretty elite. Like, I don't want it to sound like we're snobby. It's just that we get so many submissions a year that you really have to just look for, the cream of the crop. For example, I ran the numbers from July 1st, 2023 to June 30th, 2024. We received 5,122 writing submissions through Submittable. Submittable is a website for authors and for publishers to the authors submit their writing, and then you can track, where it is in the process, and it's easier for the publishers to go through the submissions and, rank them or communicate with the author, things like that. But of those over 5,000 submissions, we published 146 pieces in our 3 print issues. So that's a 2.85 print acceptance rate. But we only published 72 pieces on Open Space. That is the section of our website that is online, exclusive, and free content. And so that was only a 1.41 acceptance rate. So it actually means that if you get published on our website, it's even more exclusive than in the print issue. But in contrast to that, with MagPie magazine, I accept the vast majority of submissions. I can only think of maybe 1 or 2 things that I didn't take. And that's because I do intentionally have a theme for every issue, just like with Gary and the cover art. I know it's important to inspire people by having some sort of parameters, and so I ask that when people submit to MagPie, it's either something to do with whatever the theme of the issue is, or it has something to do with the season that quarter is. And then as far as organization, with the North American Review, we do everything in Google Drive. We use the Submittable website to keep things organized and communicate with authors. But with MagPie, it's so much smaller, and so I'm able to just accept things through email. One thing I'm really proud of, though, is that one of the things that I do with MagPie is that I have a link to the issue. that I send out to contributors to give it a final look through before it goes live. And that is something that I brought to the North American Review. They did not do that until I started, and now they do. And that is so helpful for everybody to have one last chance to look at their section and catch any little typos. So it's even more important when it gets printed. One other thing is that the editors of the NAR created an OER textbook that is an open educational resource. That means that it is absolutely free to access this textbook online. That picture is me with Grant Tracy and Rachel Morgan doing a panel at the Rod Library talking about it. But that was able to help students save over $7,000 last year that they otherwise would have had to pay for a textbook. So coming full circle with my community, I have some examples of how my past, present, and different communities I'm part of all tie together. So Jeff Rindles is my brother's friend from high school who initially inspired me to start my Candy Girl zine. And I am so happy that I was able to publish his artwork in the North American Review. He was one of the people that I knew in that special women-created issue. Stephanie Cloesy is somebody who, when I was in college, I contributed a piece of art to an auction that they were having at Cup of Joe. It was a benefit auction for the Iowa Women's Foundation, and the proceeds of that went to create grants for women who were starting businesses in Iowa. And she bought a piece of my art there. And so I had always known her name because I knew that she purchased a piece of my art. But it wasn't until she actually reached out to me because she discovered MagPie online and was interested in submitting a piece of writing. And we eventually met in person at a retreat at Three Pines Farm in Cedar Falls. And after that, we became friends. She has been a contributor to MagPie multiple times. She's written several stories for me. And I went to a party at her house and I saw my art in her kitchen. So that made me so happy. And when I was at a different party at her house, I met Scott Kowalty, and he is the person who was responsible for collecting essays by 10 different people who are all in their 80s. And so they were all in the most recent issue of MagPie. The theme of that issue was wisdom. So I'm so happy. This is one of those examples of how, meeting one person at one point in my life led to making a connection and then making another connection, and the community is growing out from there. This next person is my friend Caroline Ledeboer. She is a professor in the UNI English department. She's an advisor. She's somebody who I didn't meet until I started working for the North American Review. And she's a poet, but she also teaches classes about writing creative nonfiction. And so I have published her poetry. And she also wrote an introduction to a section in this most recent issue by students in her class. And so it was nice when I was actually talking to her about this yesterday. She was saying how she ran into Scott Kowalty, and they were talking about how great it was that he had all of these essays by his friends who are all in their 80s. She had this section of essays by her students, college students, and how, even though we don't have a tangible object of a printed magazine, the fact that the pieces within the themed issues are kind of in conversation with each other, that's really great, because then she ran into Scott in person in the community, and she had a reason to talk to him and discuss how these pieces work together. And so that's one of the best things about MagPie being a locally focused community thing, is that you do have the opportunity to literally run into other people that are contributors to the magazine. So I really love that. The other thing about Caroline is that she has told me several times about the concept of, you know how different groups of animals have a name? Like if there's a group of crows, they're called a murder of crows. Well, she learned that a group of magpie birds is called a mischief. And she just thought that was so wonderful, and she was trying to convince me to put something on my website so people could make donations, but I've been resistant because I'm trying to keep no money involved with anything magpie. But she did inspire me by putting that seed of an idea in the back of my mind of a mischief of magpies. The next person here is James Mackey. I have known him for 15 years. He lives in Minnesota now, but we stayed Facebook friends after he moved away. And I just the other day saw a post on Facebook about how he was organizing an art show in Mankato, Minnesota. And the theme of the show is cereal box art. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. So what he wanted was people to make something that looked like it was a cereal box. And I thought, that's a very inspiring idea. And then all of a sudden it clicked with the mischief of magpies in my head. And I thought, I'm going to submit something. I have the perfect idea. And so I'm so happy that thanks to Caroline having this conversation with me and then seeing this Facebook post by James, you know, these are people that are from totally different parts of my world. These things came together to inspire this piece of art. So this is my submission to James's show. I made this in Photoshop, and it is kind of political. It's based on some things that I saw at the Democratic National Convention. And so the issue, or the fall issue, the theme of that one is change. And it comes out November 1st, so it'll be right before the election. And so I created this piece of art, and then thanks to my husband, Kent, he is the one who took my flat art and 3D rendered it to look like a cereal box. So I could not have done it without him. I'm so happy about how it turned out. So that is not only going to be in this art show in Minnesota, but it also is going to be the cover art for the change issue. So I'm so happy that those worlds collided to create some art. So then the last full circle moment I wanted to talk about, I got a message randomly from somebody on Instagram. His name is Fernando. This was earlier last year, I think. He sent me this message and said that he's 25, he was a college student in Germany, and he was doing a project all about Barbara Kruger. If you recall, I mentioned her at the beginning. She's my all-time favorite artist. And he found this book called Love for Sale at the university library, and he wanted to buy a copy for himself because he really loved it. And when he was looking on Amazon to buy a copy, he found a review of this book that I wrote when I was a senior in high school. And I don't know if they still do this, but in 1999, they had a thing where if you wrote a review, you could create like a reviewer biography. And so he clicked on my name and read my bio, and he thought that I sounded like a really interesting person. And somehow, through space and time, from the other side of the world 20 plus years later, he managed to track me down. And he found me on Instagram, and he wanted to know, you know, did you do all the things that you said? Because in my biography, I talked about how I want to have an art show in New York, and I want to travel to India, and I would love to meet Barbara Kruger, you know, and it's just like finding a journal entry or something. It was so funny to me. I had completely forgotten about this. And so he wanted to know, did you fulfill all of these dreams that you talked about? And so I was so happy to be able to report to him that, yes, I do have a life that is totally full of art and creativity. And I told him about MagPie. I told him about my job at the North American Review. So it was very exciting. I was so happy that I got that message. So that picture there, that's him. House of Nando is his Instagram page. And so now we're Instagram friends, and I'm very pleased with that. So my takeaways about building a creative community. I do have a table up here that has a bunch of copies of back issues of the North American Review. I would love it for you guys to take 1 or 2 of those. I also have a handout sheet that lists a bunch of websites and things that I've been talking about. And so there's a few things on there that I was just going to mention now. So the themes of my talk in general, what I want you to take away from this is that it's important to pursue all of your various interests. You know, all of the different types of creativity that I had, it was all over the place. I never would have dreamt that one of those things would be getting involved in a labor union. But because I was curious and said, yes, I want to check this out, it changed the trajectory of my life, and I'm so grateful for that. The other thing is that I can tell you it totally pays off to be vulnerable and to be the person to make the first move and to reach out to other people. If you reach out to other people, you know, what's the worst can happen? They never write you back or whatever. But a lot of times you'll find that people are very interested in people that are interested in them. And so it is nice to make those connections, and your network will grow from there. I also think it's really important to be consistent and to keep keep going and keep working to be taken seriously. Just like what I said about making buttons and stickers and business cards, you know, you can have the swag, but the thing that makes people take me the most seriously is the fact that I've consistently put out 26 issues of my magazine. So it is a lot of work, but it's totally worth it to me, and I love doing it. I also think it's really important to go to events big and small. Thank you for being here today as an example of that. There are other local things and farther away things like the Lit Fest in Chicago, or if you went to something as large as AWP conference. But there's also Final Thursday reading series at the Hearst Center, the last Thursday of every month. There are places where you can go if you are interested in reading your work. They have an open mic that starts that event every week before the main event author who's reading. I encourage you to do stuff like that. There's also resources. One thing that I think is super interesting, there's this free newsletter that's called the Lit Mag Reading Club that I learned about because one of the other NAR editors was interviewed as part of a podcast, and then he got a subscription to this newsletter and sent it to me. But that's really interesting as far as like industry news. There's all kinds of lit magazine gossip in that world. They talk about when places are hiring for different positions, or even positions that when magazines are looking for volunteer readers. Recently, there was the topic of one of these newsletters was about how can writers build community, and it was talking about the idea of sort of like cold calling, or just emailing people that you don't know to introduce yourself. And that sometimes works, sometimes doesn't, but the most practical tip that the author of this essay said was, if you want to become a better writer and to know what magazines are looking for, volunteer to be a reader for a lit magazine. So I thought that was a really good concrete piece of advice. And so I encourage you to look at that and sign up for it. And then finally, submit your work to MagPie. I would love to have you. Like I said, I accept the vast majority, like 99% of the submissions that I get. So that is where I'm going to close. I want to know if anybody has any questions.
I have a question.
Yes.
What's your next issue again, and what's your deadline?
So the next issue for fall, the theme is change. And the deadline is October 15th, and it will be published, released on November 1st.
And do you have a card with your email address, so if we want to email you our submission?
Yes, I have cards, buttons, stickers for MagPie. I have stickers and my business card for the North American Review. I have a bunch of back issues of the NAR, and I even have a couple of copies each of 2 books. There's one called Black Fin, which is kind of a crime novel. The author of that happens to be Mary Frisbee Johnson, who was my art professor when I was a student at UNI. And the other one is called Feed the Lake, and that one is essays on the craft of fiction. So if you're a fiction writer, I encourage you to take one of those. Does anybody have any other questions? Yes.
How do you get the OER textbook?
I forgot to put the link to that on my handout, but if you email me, I can send you a link to it. The thing that's so great about that textbook, I meant to say earlier, but I had to sit down and lost my train of thought. It was created specifically for students who take elements of creative writing, which is the introduction class, and that cover, the elements of poetry and of creative nonfiction and fiction. But the other thing that has been so useful with that book is that sometimes when we get a submission from somebody through Submittable and we decline them, they write back and they really would love individual critique, but the editors do not have time to do that. So I can tell them, look at this book, and it's a collection of all the best wisdom of our editors about every different genre of writing. So I love being able to use that as a source for authors that are, outside of the student body. Anybody else? Yeah.
What are requirements, or what are you looking for in volunteer readers?
Well, I don't know. We really don't have any for the North American Review, but what the person was talking about from that LitMag Reading Club newsletter, because there's so many different types of literary magazines, and so some of them are really specific to, maybe just science fiction, or maybe one is just poetry or something. And so if there's something that you are particularly interested in, I guarantee that there is a literary magazine that matches that interest, and that would be the place that you would want to start to volunteer. I do have a question for you guys. Do you know what this is, this picture of Tom Hanks? In my personal opinion, it's the funniest Saturday Night Live skit of all time. His name is David S. Pumpkins. And if you've never seen it, I highly encourage you to look it up on YouTube because it's the funniest thing I've ever seen. So that's what I like to end my presentation with. Thank you.